So you've watched the trailer, you've read the rules, you're ready to start playing Catastrophic in solo mode. So click on the link and that will take you to Tabletopia, where it will create a new game room for you. Because it's solo mode, you're the only person there, so you're able to start as soon as you have it uploaded. I have a login at Tabletopia. You could make one if you want. If you don't want to, you can play as a guest. Once the game says it's ready, click Start, and that will open up a game for you to play. It's Catastrophic solo mode. So the aim of Catastrophic is to create a community that is resilient to events that get thrown at it. And you do this using plants and animals which sit in a community, and they have interactions between the populations in the community, and then they respond to events that are played on them. It's quite a vicious game when you play multiplayer, so playing it on your own to get to grips with both the basic rules of the game and with the way that Tabletopia works, knowing how to draw cards into your hand, for example, or put them down, is a good idea, so you can understand what's going on in your own community and how to deal with the basic cards before you have to start fighting off events and interactions that are played on you by other players. Okay, so once you're into the game, you should see a green table which has 3 decks of cards on it. We have the animal trait cards here in red, we've got the plant trait cards here in green, and then we have a yellow and blue deck which is called Nature Calls, and we'll come back to that in a moment. The other things you have on the table are 2 action tokens here. You have a bag full of population tokens, and you have an icon legend here which is going to be a quick lookup for you to see what's going on in your cards. Down at the bottom right you can see there's a message box, and if you click on that it'll tell you a little bit about what's going on. So I've created a room, I've started a game, I've entered the game. If you were playing multiplayer you could send messages to other players in the game. As it is, you could chat to yourself, I guess. Over on the left there are various icons, so you can turn the sound on and off if you want to. There's a handy help summary, so if you click on that question mark it brings up a really nice picture of how all of the Tabletopia controls work. But if you get stuck and you're thinking I want to flip a card or I want to take a token, have a look at that help page by clicking on the question mark. We've also got the rules of the game, so if you click on the icon there it'll bring up a nice PDF which you can navigate through by scrolling. And so if you want a reminder of how the rules are supposed to work, you can look there. And solo mode is on page 10, so the basic rules, read them through, and then you have solo mode as well. Okay, so we've got the table, we've got the rules, we've got some help files, but what do we actually want to do? Well, Catastrophic starts with plant species. So what we want to do is we want to draw 6 plant cards into our hands. And the way we do that is we go to this deck, we right click, and then we want to draw cards, which is this icon at the bottom. And we want to take 6, so we can just pick the 6, click on that, and you can see that 6 plant trait cards have just dropped into our hand at the bottom of the screen. If you want to take a closer look at any of those cards, you can double click on them, and that'll give you a closer view. So I'm going to talk you through a trait card, and the animal and the plant traits work in very much the same way. So at the top we have a title which tells you what the trait is, and this one is Seed Dormancy. In the middle there's a picture which gives you an idea of what seed dormancy is all about. Here we've got the seed having a little sleep in the soil, and we have some flavour text down here which gives you again some biological information about this trait. And then there are some more icons on the card. On the right we've got conditions, and what these do is they tell you if a trait belongs to a species, then that species is well adapted to live in certain conditions. And for seed dormancy, we're well adapted to disturbance, the meteorite, and to the cold. On the left we have attributes. So a species that has this trait has these attributes, and this one is dispersal. So this species, this plant species that has seed dormancy, is good at dispersal. It can send out its seeds and they can sit and wait until conditions are right for the plant to grow. You click on the card, it'll go back into your hand. If you want to have a closer look at your icon card down here, again you can double click on it and it'll bring it up. It shows you all of the condition icons and all of the attributes that cards might have. So if you're not sure what any of those icons mean at any point, go and take a look. To start the game, we're going to put down some plant species. And the way that you create a species is simply by taking trait cards and putting them in a group on the table together. So I'm going to make 3 species. I'm going to put down Phyllotaxis by picking it up and dragging it onto the table. I'm going to give that species fruit production. I'm going to have another plant species which can produce alkaloids and it also has large quantities of seeds. And then I'm going to have my seed dormancy trait over here with low stomatal density. You can zoom in on the table either by scrolling with a mouse wheel or by using plus or minus on the keyboard. And then you can move around the table using A and D to go left and right and W and S to go forwards and backwards. So I can have a look at those species a little bit closer. There we go. My species in the middle here, it's well adapted for herbivory and it's good at dispersal, but it's probably not very resilient to many other conditions. Similarly, my one over here with Phyllotaxis, it can cope with low light conditions. It's good at dispersal, but it's going to have trouble with fighting off some events. The one over here, it can cope with cold, low water and disturbance, and it's good at dispersal, so that's a really good species to have. When you put a species down on the table, it gets 2 population tokens, and those are held in this bag over here. And the way you can get those out is to right click, and just like with the cards, you have an opportunity to either take or draw tokens. Now draw will put them into your hand, take will simply put them onto the table. I've got 3 species, so I need 6 tokens, and there they are. I can drag these over to my species, drop them there, and then I'm going to put 2 on this species and 2 on this species over here. So it can be a little bit fiddly picking up and putting down elements in the game. Much easier with a mouse than using a trackpad on a laptop or something like that. So we've got our 3 species, but wait, they all have good dispersal. They've got that dispersal attribute. So we're going to give them an extra population token to represent the idea that they're good at dispersing. They're likely to have bigger populations. So we right click on. I've managed to lock the population token bag there. So I'm going to unlock it and then I can right click it again and I can take another 3 tokens and I can put those onto my species. So that's really good. My first trophic level in this community is good and solid. It's got lots of plants, lots of individuals in each of those populations. I'm ready to play. In solo mode and in multiplayer mode, there are 2 parts to your turn. In the first part, you do some actions which develop either your hand or the community that's on the table. In the second part, you respond to the environment trying to kill you. The actions, there are 5 actions that you can do. You can draw cards into your hand, and you can discard cards back onto the table into a discard pile. In solo mode, you can draw 4 cards from either the plant or the animal trait piles. In multiplayer mode, you can draw up to 7 cards from any of the 3 piles. So we're in solo mode. I can draw 4 cards. I've already got some plants, so I think I'm just going to go straight in and I'm going to take 4 animal traits. I'm drawing here 4 animal trait cards into my hand, and there they are. That was one action. So I can take my action token and I can just put it at that end of the table to remember that I've done an action. The other actions that I can do is to introduce new species, and that's essentially what we did in that setup phase with the plants. We put some cards down, we introduced species, and we put the population tokens on them. I could mutate species, and that would involve picking up one of the cards in a species and then replacing it with another one from my hand. So I take one card into my hand and I put another one back on the table. Or I can evolve species by adding a trait card to a species that's already in existence. I haven't got any plant trait cards, so I can't mutate or evolve on this turn, so I'm just going to introduce 2 animal species into my trophic pyramid. So here I've got taxis, which is a movement, makes me better at escaping predation. I've got the R strategist, which is a reproducer. So that's really good. That's an opportunity to get more population tokens into my species. And it's also good at responding to disturbance. I've got blubber, which is an aquatic organism trait, and it's good with cold water. And I've got the exoskeleton. So this is good at coping with low water and escaping predation. So I think I'm going to combine these to have the taxis and the exoskeleton in different species because they're both resilient to predation. And then I'll make the exoskeleton one be the aquatic species. Will I? Yeah, you see the exoskeleton is also good at low water, so giving it an aquatic trait is probably a bit weird. Okay, so I'm going to put the blubber over this side. And then I'm going to make my exoskeleton species the R strategist. So I've created 2 new animal species there. I need to go and take some population tokens. Take 4, because none of them are good at dispersal. And I put those tokens on there. I've introduced, so I drew cards and I've introduced, that's my 2 actions in the solo game. I would get 3 actions in the multiplayer game. So that's the end of my responsive part of the turn. Now nature calls, and when nature calls, what we do is we take a card. I'm going to draw a card from the nature calls deck, and there it is. It's yellow, which means that it's an event. Let's have a look. Habitat fragmentation, which has serious ecological impacts, including population loss and reduced biodiversity. This is an event that only has negative consequences for my biological community, and it is that the species with the fewest population tokens goes extinct. Great. Okay, so I'm going to play that event on myself. I have to play an event on myself if it comes out of the nature calls draw. And I can look at my community. All my plants have got 3 population tokens, which is good. My animals have got 2, so one of those is going to go extinct. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it. Realistically, it's probably the terrestrial one, since it's a bit harder to fragment the habitat in the water. So I put my population tokens back in the bag, which I can do just by dragging them and then holding over until the bag opens and drop it there. And I put the cards on the discard pile. Goodbye, our strategist. It's nice knowing you. And that is the end of nature calls for that turn. Cool. So in solo mode, it's my turn again. We don't have to worry about having turn-based mode turned on or anything like that. So I've got 2 actions. I can draw and discard. I can introduce, mutate, and evolve. I'm going to draw because I've got no cards and I can't do anything otherwise. I'm going with animals again. I'm going to get 4 more animal cards, and this time I've got a few different things. So I've got fins here, which is an aquatic species that's good at dispersal because it helps you swim. I've got viviparous, which is a reproductive card again. That sounds good. Oh, I've got chloride cells. I've got a bit of an aquatic theme going here. And shivering thermogenesis, which is good for cold temperatures. Right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another aquatic species here. Chloride cells and fins, why not? And then I'm going to give myself a carnivore. And to make a bit of space, you can select multiple items by holding down Shift. You can see they've all turned blue, and then I can move this species down a bit. Same with this one. Making sure you've got room on the table is something you need to think about right from the beginning of the game. And I'm going to have this land-based monster that preys on aquatic organisms sitting at the top of my food chain, because why not? So those are going to get some population tokens, and that sets them up to start living in this community. But don't forget that one of those, it can be a bit tricky to pick these up. I'll zoom in a bit. Fins here was a trait that has the dispersal icon, so it gets an extra population token when that card goes down, which is fun. So we'll take one more for that. And plonk it there. Okay, so I drew cards and I introduced species. I forgot to move my action tokens. That's okay. You can use them if they're helpful, and you can just leave them at the side of the table if they're not. Most people can count to 2. Again, I've done the interactive bit. Now I have to respond to the environment. So I'm going to take a card here. Just going to put it into my hand. It's another event. It's a herbivore introduction, and it affects plant species only. Okay. So in solo mode, if it mentions your opponent, you just have to do it to yourself. In multiplayer mode, if it comes from the Nature Calls draw, then you have to apply it to yourself. Otherwise, you might be able to play events on other people's communities, which is where the game starts getting a bit vicious. So 2 of my vulnerable species, 2 of my plant species that aren't resilient to herbivory, are going to lose a population token. But if all of my species are resilient, I get to draw 3 cards. So there's some positive effects for my ability to support the community if my species are resilient to events. So let's have a look. When you have an event like this, you go back to your species and you check whether they are resilient or vulnerable. This number here, the 1, means that it has to have one of the icons on the card. Now in this case, there's only 1. So, do my plant species have the trait that lets them survive herbivory? This one can cope with low light. This one is good at dispersal. So this species here is vulnerable. This one's good at dispersal. Oh, but it can cope with herbivory because it has alkaloids. Great. Okay, so this one is resilient. This one is vulnerable. This one is vulnerable. Okay, so I've got 2 vulnerable species, 1 resilient one. Go back to that event. 2 of my vulnerable species are losing a population token. So each of these plants has been reduced because it's been eaten by the herbivore that was introduced. But they've all still got population tokens, so that's fine. We've played that event. We can pop it down there. And that's the end of that turn. You can see the trophic pyramid is developing nicely here. I could add some more plants over here, and then I could start supporting more herbivores and more carnivores, and maybe even get as far as an apex predator. So let's give that a go. So on this turn, I'm going to draw 2 plants and 2 animals. That's my 4 cards. So I've got pattern triggered immunity here, which is resilient to parasitism, and sclerenchyma cells, which are resilient to herbivory. So that sounds quite nice. So for my other action, I'm going to introduce. And I'm going to have another one there. And then I can introduce another animal as well. This one has evaporative heat loss, which makes it good in hot places, and concentrated urine, which makes it good in hot places with low water and low, is that low or high osmolarity? That's high osmolarity, there we go. So we can use the icon legend to check when we're not sure what things mean. So camels, they have concentrated urine. So that's a good example illustration for this trait. I'm going to to keep these cards in my hand actually this time. So I've introduced one species, that was my action, but I'm just going to hang on to these cards till next time. But I mustn't forget to put some population tokens onto my new plant species. So that's my interactive turn. Now I'm going to take one of these, and it's another event. Oh no. Carnivore introduction. There are a lot of animals wandering around in this catastrophic game room. So this time, again, to be resilient, I've got to have one icon, which is the predation icon condition on my on a trait card in my species. If I've got some vulnerable species, then one of them is going to lose 2 population tokens. But if they're all resilient, I get cards. Okay. So this species is resilient to predation. But this species is not. I can see it hasn't got any condition icons there. And this species is not. Okay. Right. And it's going to lose 2 population tokens. Well, you know, I think I'm going to do this one because it's got more population tokens. Boo. There we go. So this species is now quite vulnerable. It's got a very small population size. So if something else happens to it, it might be in trouble and might go extinct, which would be quite fun to watch. So that's another event. In the solo game, we normally only go to 4 events, so we'll see what happens on the next turn. I'm going to draw for one of my actions, and I'm going to take 2 plant cards. There we go. So I've got a shallow root system here, which can't be played on a species that has a deep root system, unsurprisingly. And I have systemic acquired resistance, which makes me resilient to parasitism. Okay, so draw was one of my actions. For my second action, I think I'm actually going to evolve some of my plants because a lot of them don't have very many conditions that they're resilient to. So I'm going to add the shallow root system to this species over here, and I'm going to add resilience to parasitism to this species here. And that was my 2 actions. So now nature calls again. Over to this deck. Draw one more. And finally, we get an interaction card. So this is a blue card rather than a yellow card. What the interactions allow you to do is to make connections between species in your community or between communities if you're playing in the multiplayer game. So you might have species moving between communities or coming to eat your species. This interaction is courtship. Courtship occurs between members of the same species as a way to prevent crossbreeding and increase the chance of reproductive success. So I can play this on my turn, and what it allows me to do is go through the animal trait discard pile until I reach a trait that has a reproduction attribute and add it to my hand. Courtship helps reproduction in the real world. The courtship card is going to help me make species that have reproductive traits in the future. Let's have a look. I'm going to play it now because there is a card in the discard pile. And so when you play an interaction and it's done with, it goes into the discard pile of the Nature Calls deck. And I can take this card here into my hand by dragging it right down to the bottom. And that's the R strategist. So I'll be able to add that to an animal species on a future turn. In the solo game, there are a few interactions which don't work. So you can just discard those when they turn up. Like Continental Drift, where you change a hand with other players in the game. So just discard those if they come up and draw another card. Okay, so I've played 3 events. I've still got 1 more to go before I can say I've played a long enough game in the solitaire mode. So this time I'm going to take some cards and I'm going to introduce some species. I can only take 1 because I'm only allowed 4 cards in my hand. But there we go, I've got dichogamy, which is a reproducting card for plants. Okay, so I've drawn cards. Actually, for my other action, I think I'm going to evolve again. So I'm going to add some cards to species that already exist. I'm going to add the R strategist to this animal species here. And I'm going to add my dichogamy to this plant over here. It's quite funny, you can just drop things and they sit there and look very 3D. It makes it a bit hard to see what's going on. I might move that population token out of the way. There we go. And why not? Let's add evaporative heat loss to this species and concentrated urine to this one up here. There we go. So if you pick up the bottom thing, it moves everything, which is good. There we go. Right, that's my turn. I drew cards and I evolved species. So now nature calls. It's another interaction, and this is brilliant. This is the reproduction interaction. So you can play this on your turn. You choose either your plants or your animals, and then any species that have got that reproduction attribute undergo reproduction, and you get to add population tokens to them equal to the number next to the reproduction icon on the species. And I've got, let's have a look. So this animal could get 2 population tokens if I reproduce my animals. This one could get 3. Or I could do my plants. Zoom in a bit. I'm going to do my animals. Okay, so this one isn't going to reproduce, but these 2 are, and they are going to get 2 population tokens there and 3 population tokens there. Find my tokens. So I've got some good populations going on there. This is looking like quite a healthy community, and I've played that now, so I put it into the discard. And I've got another turn because I've still only survived 3 events. I'm going to draw some cards because I haven't really got any. Let's have some plants this time. Let's just have 4 plants. Excellent. Ruderal, good for disturbance. Insectivory, which helps in low nutrient availability. The parasitic plant. And the shallow root system again. And I think I'm going to evolve again, so I'm going to add a shallow root system to this one. I'm going to make it a parasitic plant as well. I'll add the insectivory to this one. Now let's have a look. The parasitic plant has a lot of extra text, so any bold text on a trait card, when you put it down, that's telling you some extra game mechanics. So when you play this card, you can choose an opponent that has a plant species that's vulnerable to parasitism and basically steal some of its population tokens because you're using its energy instead. Because this is the solo game, we don't get to do that, which is a bit of a shame. But in the multiplayer game, this is a nice card to be able to play on your own species. And let's put the disturbance over here. So you'll notice that when you use an action to do something, here we've been evolving, you can evolve as many species as you like, and that only counts for 1 action. You can do 2 actions that are the same in the multiplayer game because you can you have 3 actions to play with. So for example, you could draw cards, you could introduce species, and then you could draw some more cards. In the solo game, because you've only got 2 actions, you just have to pick 2 actions and do them, but they apply to all of the species as you're doing that action. And nature calls again. Draw 1. It's another interaction. Cleaning symbiosis. So we can place this card between 2 animal species, and both of them are then resilient to parasitism. So I'm going to do that. Why not? I'm going to put it between these two animals. There we go. Bunk. You don't have to do all of your actions in a turn, so I'm drawing some cards here. I think I will evolve. I'll add the Semmelparus reproduction card to this species, and I might give it a few more traits, a few more conditions to be resilient to. So this one here, hibernation, can't be played on a species that does torpor. And I've got torpor as well, which can't be played on a species with hibernation, so that's fun. And I've got camouflage, which helps you hide from predation. So if we're in the process of evolving, well, I might as well, I'm going to give this one some torpor, give this one hibernation, and I'll give, oh, I'm going to hang on to that one, use it later. Then nature calls. Denitrification. Okay, so if you draw an interaction on the nature calls round in the solo mode and it's a negative effect, you have to play it on yourself straight away. So this is a real shame because denitrification is going to reduce the number of cards, the action number, that I can have in my hand. So I was able to have 4 cards in my hand. Now I can only have 2 cards in my hand. But it says this card cannot affect communities that have plants that are resilient to low nutrient availability. So let's just check that. And I've just added lots of traits which make me resilient to low nutrient availability. So that's brilliant. This card gets to be thrown away straight away and it doesn't affect me. I can still have 4 cards in my hand. I'm going to skip my actions this round and just go straight for another nature calls, and it's an event. Okay, so intensive farming, it affects plants only, and I have to have the low nutrient availability adaptation to be able to cope with intensive farming. So I get to choose one of my vulnerable species and it loses 2 population tokens, but I get 1 card for each resilient species. So let's have a look at the plants and see what we're dealing with. You can hide your hand by pressing H, which lets you see things a bit more easily. Okay, so this species here is vulnerable. This one is resilient. This one is resilient. And this one is vulnerable. Okay, so the ones at the end are vulnerable. The ones in the middle are resilient. Okay, so I can draw 2 cards because I've got 2 resilient species, and then one of my vulnerable species is going to lose 2 population tokens. Now the sensible thing to do would be to lose this one because it hasn't got anything eating it, but I'm not going to do that because I want to show you what happens when a species that is being eaten by things further up the food chain goes extinct. Okay, so I will draw 2 cards for my resilient species. But this one is going to go extinct. So I can throw away the trait cards. And what we find now, having played that event, this species up here is in trouble, because it doesn't have 2 food sources anymore, it's only got 1. At the end of my turn, the species that have lost food sources will lose the number of population tokens equal to the number of food sources that they've lost. So this one has lost 1 of 2 food sources. It's the end of my turn now, so it's going to lose 1 of its population tokens because it's starving slowly. Now I'm fortunate because I've got high populations. I've got lots of population tokens, so actually this species can last for quite a long time before it too goes extinct. It's solo mode, so I'm on to my next turn, and of course the sensible thing to do now is to introduce a new plant species for that animal to feed from. So I'm going to add my sclerenchyma cells, my hypersensitivity response. I get to take 2 more population tokens, and I have replaced that food source, and my species will be fine from now on. But you can see that it has been affected by that process. And I think that'll do for my actions on this turn. Let's have one more nature calls. And it's another event. Oh my goodness, it's a natural disaster. So in this one, I have to have the disturbance condition to be resilient to the natural disaster. And in this one, it's really vicious. It's a bad, bad natural disaster. Each vulnerable species is going to lose 2 population tokens. I get to draw 1 card for each resilient species, but this affects the entire community. So let's have a look and see which species are resilient to natural disasters. Okay, this plant is not. It's going to lose 2 population tokens. I'm just going to dump them in a pile here so I can keep count. That one's in trouble. This one is also going to lose 2 population tokens. This one's okay, I can draw a card for that. This one's okay, I can draw a card for that. This one is alright. Oh, this is quite a resilient community. This is nice. What about my carnivore up here? No. Right, so my carnivore at the top is vulnerable, but fortunately there's lots of it, so it's losing 2 population tokens, but it's not going extinct. That one's still got one left. This one that I just introduced, literally last turn, is going extinct again. Lovely. Right, so chuck those on the discard pile, which means it's the end of my turn. This one has lost a food source again, so it's going to lose another population token. It's just as well. There were loads of it. Okay. So all of those are going back in the bag for another day. You could just leave them in a pile on the table if you found it easier. And we've played that event. So there we have it. Solo mode Catastrophic. We build a plant community. We build animals on top of that. There are interactions that sit between the animals which help them be more resilient to events. When we play events, we figure out whether our species are resilient or vulnerable. We count it up. We do whatever it says on the event card. We apply the negative effects first. Then we apply the positive effects. Then we deal with things like food sources having gone extinct. We can play interactions that make populations reproduce. There's a pollination card as well, which again helps the species to survive and to reproduce. And then we have to say, well, how do we win? Okay, so in multiplayer game, it's kind of easier because you have people that you might beat, and you can play interactions and events on other people whenever you pick them up, because you can pick them up as part of one of the actions. So you can be really vicious, you can take out other people's communities with a forest fire or a natural disaster. In the solo game, much like the multiplayer game, what you can do is you can look at how many population tokens each of your species has. And what we can suggest is adding up a weighted sum of population tokens. So I'm just checking whether I've got any hiding under there. You count 1 point for each plant population token, 2 points for each herbivore, 3 points for each carnivore, you have 4 points if you manage to fill the table and get an even higher trophic pyramid. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 points for my community there, which is pretty good because I did get up to 3 trophic levels. I survived 5 events and I've got pretty decent populations. If I was going to keep playing, I would need to introduce a new food source here and I would maybe start adding some more interactions between species as they came out of the deck. But that's it. That's Catastrophic solo mode. Have a go, enjoy playing it, read all the cards. Don't forget you can double click on a card if you want to see it close up. You can also flip cards And that's useful if you look at the icon legend because it has a quick lookup of what the actions are and what to do with nature calls. Thanks for playing. Let us know how you get on and we'll see you in Catastrophic multiplayer mode someday soon.